They say the worst things happen when you least expect them, and maybe that's why they hit so hard, because you're not braced for the impact. I wasn't. None of us were. It was just a normal Saturday night. Dinner was over, and the dishwasher hummed softly in the kitchen. I was on the couch, half listening to a news segment about a gas leak downtown, scrolling through my phone while the kids bickered over which show to watch. "Come on, Danny. We watched your show last night." Amy, my 12-year-old, was clutching the remote like it was a lifeline. Her 10-year-old brother, Danny, was just as stubborn, yanking at the other end. He was thrashing about like a dog. "That was 2 nights ago," he shot back. "It's my turn." "Guys," I called, not looking up. "Figure it out or I'm picking." That was all it took. Both of them groaned in unison and plopped onto the couch, suddenly united in their fear of my choice of content. In the kitchen, my wife Sarah was pouring herself a glass of wine. She leaned against the counter, watching us with a small smile. "You're too soft on them," she teased, her voice warm and familiar. "You know they're good kids," I said, finally looking up. "Most of the time, they're half yours after all." "Half mine," she repeated with a smirk. She took a sip and moved toward the table where she'd been working on her laptop all day. Papers were spread out in a mess only she could understand, highlighted notes scattered like confetti. "You still working on that proposal?" I asked. "Trying to," she replied. "I swear if I don't get this submitted by Wednesday, I'm going to lose my mind." "You won't," I said. "You always pull it off." She smiled at that, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful, normal. The kids had settled on some cartoon, and their laughter filled the room, blending with the faint hum of the heater and the occasional clink of Sarah's wine glass against the table. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows like a restless spirit. "Dad," Danny called suddenly, pulling me out of my thoughts. "Yeah, bud? Do you think Santa's real?" The question caught me off guard. I glanced at Sarah, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Why do you ask?" I said carefully. He shrugged, looking unusually serious for a 10-year-old. "Just kids at school said he's not, that it's just parents pretending." Amy jumped in before I could respond. "Of course he's real. You're just saying that because you didn't get an Xbox last year." "I didn't want an Xbox," Danny shot back, his cheeks flushing red. Okay, I said, holding up my hands. "Let's not start another war. Look, buddy, Santa's as real as you want him to be. Some people believe and some don't. It's up to you." He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely satisfied. The conversation drifted after that, and the night wore on like any other. Sarah finished her work, the kids eventually started napping on the couch, and I stayed up a little longer, scrolling aimlessly through my phone. It was just after midnight when I heard it, a knock at the door. At first I thought I'd imagined it. Who knocks on someone's door at midnight? It came again, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I stood, my pulse quickening. Sarah appeared at the hallway entrance, wrapping her robe tighter around her. "Who could that be?" she asked, her voice low. "I don't know," I said, moving toward the door. "Be careful," she whispered. I peered through the peephole, but the porch light was out. All I could see was darkness. "Who is it?" Sarah asked again, her voice now tinged with unease. "I don't see anyone," I said, unlocking the deadbolt. I opened the door. At first I thought the porch was empty. The cold night spilled into the doorway, making my breath plume in the air. Then I looked down, and my heart skipped a beat. It stood there, no more than 5 feet tall, a life-sized elf, like something ripped straight from a Christmas store display. Its face was pale, painted porcelain with rosy cheeks and a frozen grin that stretched unnaturally wide. Gears and springs peeked from cracks in its stiff wooden body, ticking faintly like an old clock. Its eyes, glossy and shiny, reflected the faint light from inside our home. "Who is it?" Sarah called softly from behind me. I didn't answer as I stared down at the thing. It cocked its head with a series of small clicks, its movements jerky and mechanical. "Hello?" I called out towards the empty snowdrifts billowing around my house, hoping to hear a response from whoever left this strange toy outside. The elf straightened abruptly, its wooden limbs creaking. "A guest I am, come out of the cold," it said, its voice high and sing-song, like a wind-up toy's excited melody. "Let me in if I may be so bold." "What the hell?" I muttered, stepping back instinctively. "Who's at the door?" Sarah asked again, now closer, her tone sharper. I turned to her, still holding the door halfway open. "I don't know. It's a doll or something." Danny and Amy appeared behind Sarah, rubbing their eyes, curiosity quickly replacing their sleepiness. "A doll?" Danny said, trying to peer around her. Before I could stop them, the kids pushed past and their eyes went wide. "Whoa, that's creepy!" Amy exclaimed, though there was a trace of fascination in her voice. "Get away from it," I said, my voice more authoritative now. The elf ignored me and stepped forward, its boots clinking faintly on the wooden floor. It tilted its head again. "Your hearth is warm, your home is bright," it said, its voice lilting eerily. "May I sit and rest tonight?" Sarah looked at me, her face pale. "Is this some kind of prank?" "I don't know," I replied. Before we could stop it, the elf had walked past us, its movements unnervingly stilted. It made its way into the living room and climbed into the armchair by the fireplace, sitting perfectly still. "Hey," I said, my uncertainty shifting to frustration. "Get out, now. If there's someone operating this toy, I'm about to break it." The elf's head swiveled toward me, its eyes gleaming. "Oh, my dear host, don't be so unkind," it sang, the rhythm of its voice discordant. "You'll enjoy what I have in mind." Without thinking, I stepped forward and grabbed its thin wooden arm, yanking hard. The texture was smooth, cold, and unyielding. The elf didn't budge. "I said, get out!" I shouted, my voice shaking. I tried pulling it up from the chair, but its body twisted with a jarring series of whirs and clanks. Before I could react, its free arm shot up faster than I thought possible, slamming into my chest. Pain radiated through my ribs as I stumbled backwards, clutching at the spot where its hand had struck. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. "Dad!" Danny cried, running toward me. But Sarah grabbed him, holding him back. The elf stood up next to the chair. "Such behavior, so unrefined," it said, shaking its head. "But now the stakes are redesigned." "What the hell are you talking about?" I gasped, pushing myself up on trembling legs. It took a deliberate step closer, towering in its unnaturalness despite its small frame. "Oh, brave you are, with strength and might. But now the stakes have taken flight. Blood for blood, my rules you break. The first game now has more at stake." "What game?" Sarah demanded, her voice shrill. The elf turned toward her, tilting its head with that dreadful clicking sound. "The rules are simple, the stakes quite clear," it said, its sing-song voice grating. "The games begin, the time is near. To lose, my friend, will cost you dear." "What happens if we lose?" Amy asked, her voice barely audible. The elf didn't answer at first. It just stared at her with those glassy, polished eyes. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, it raised one wooden hand and pointed at its face. Its painted features twisted and shifted with a soft click, click, click. For the first time, the mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged metal teeth. "You'll see," it whispered. For a long moment, no one moved. The elf's thin mouth snapped back into place, and its unblinking eyes scanned each of us, the faint clicking and ticking inside its frame breaking the oppressive silence. "What the hell do you mean, rules?" I said finally, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound firm. The elf tilted its head in that unnatural way, its body creaking like an old door hinge. "Rules are simple, don't you see? Play my games and play with glee. But lose, my friends, and you shall pay. A piece of you shall go away." "What does that even mean?" Sarah snapped, her fear turning into desperation. "What do you want from us?" The elf chuckled, a grinding metallic sound. "I've traveled far on this cold, dark night to share my games and my delight. You'll play, you'll laugh, you'll surely scream. It's all just part of my grand scheme." "I'm calling the cops," I said, reaching for my phone. "No!" the elf shrieked suddenly, its voice sharper than before. The noise sent a chill down my spine as the lights in the room flickered. The air felt heavy, suffocating. "No calls, no cheats, no way to flee. Sit back down and play with me." The phone in my hand went dark. I tried turning it back on, but it was dead, completely unresponsive. Sarah checked hers too, shaking her head in panic. "We can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We can't just play along with this thing." "I don't think we have a choice," I murmured, glancing at the kids. Danny was clinging to Amy, both of them pale and trembling. The elf clapped its wooden hands together, a hollow thunk, thunk, thunk. "The first game's won, you know quite well. It's hide and seek. Oh, won't this be swell?" "Hide and seek," Danny repeated. "Indeed," the elf said gleefully, spinning its head around in a full circle with a sickening click, click, click. "The children hide, and you two seek. Don't take too long, or you'll feel weak." "What happens if we don't find them in time?" I asked, dreading the answer. The elf's mouth jittered and snapped. "Should the little ones remain unfound, the cost will surely be profound." I wanted to argue, to fight back, but the heavy weight of dread kept me frozen. Sarah grabbed my arm, her eyes pleading. "We'll find them," she whispered. "We have to." The elf clapped again and the lights flickered. "Tick-tock, tick-tock, children, run and hide! The game begins when you've both complied." The lights fully plunged into darkness. By the time they returned, the children were gone. "Start counting," the elf commanded, its voice booming and mechanical. Sarah and I exchanged a glance before reluctantly turning to face the wall. I counted aloud, each number feeling heavier than the last. 10, I finished, turning around. The elf was gone, but its faint ticking sound echoed throughout the house. "Split up," I told Sarah. "We'll check every corner." She nodded, her face pale, and we began searching. I tore through the living room, the kitchen, and the pantry, calling Danny and Amy's names. Sarah rushed upstairs, her footsteps frantic. "Danny! Amy!" I shouted, my voice echoing down the empty halls. The house felt colder now, as if the air itself had turned against us. Then I heard it, the soft rhythmic ticking growing louder. "Sarah," I called, "did you find them?" "No," she yelled back from upstairs. "Keep looking." The ticking grew closer and I turned toward the hallway. The elf emerged from the shadows, its painted grin directed towards me. "Time is ticking, oh so fast," it said, swaying slightly as it walked. "If they're not found, this moment's their last." "You sick bastard," I hissed, running toward the bedrooms. I found Amy first, curled up under her bed. "I got you," I said, pulling her out and holding her close. "Stay with me, okay?" "Where's Danny?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm going to find him," I promised, though fear clawed at my chest. Sarah came rushing down the staircase, her face stricken. "I can't find him," she said. "I looked everywhere." The elf's laughter rang out, sharp and grating. "The boy is lost, it seems to me. Oh, such a shame, it fills me with glee." "No!" I shouted, running past Sarah and tearing through every room. "Danny, where are you?" The ticking grew deafening, the sound burrowing into my skull. I burst into the basement, my chest heaving, and there he was, huddled in the corner, tears streaming down his face. "I found you!" I cried, running toward him. But it was too late. The elf appeared behind me, moving impossibly fast. Its wooden hand clamped over my shoulder, and it shoved me aside. "Too slow, too slow!" it sang, dragging Danny to his feet. The boy screamed, kicking and thrashing, but the elf's grip was unrelenting. "Stop!" Sarah cried, rushing down the stairs. The elf opened its mouth, revealing those jagged, metallic teeth. With a sickening crunch, it bit down on Danny's throat. His screams turned to wet gurgles as blood poured down his chest. I lunged at the elf, but it shoved me back with ease. Then in one swift motion, it tore something from Danny's neck, his vocal cords glistening and red. The elf held them up, inspecting them with childlike fascination. Then it pressed them to its own throat, and the gears inside whirred to life. "What joy!" the elf said in Danny's voice. Sarah collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I stared in horror as the elf's grin chattered, blood dripping from its painted lips. It tossed Danny's body to the floor like a discarded toy. "One down," it said, its voice now a chilling blend of its own and Danny's. "Shall we play again?" Sarah knelt down, her arms wrapped tightly around Danny's lifeless body. Blood stained her robe and hands, pooling around her knees, but she didn't seem to notice. Her sobs filled the room, raw and guttural, the kind of sound you never forget. Before we knew it, all of us were in the living room. Danny was gone. The elf stood near the fireplace, its painted grin wide and unnatural. Our son's voice echoed eerily from its throat, twisted and empty. "Such fun we've had. Oh, what a delight. Now shall we play again tonight?" "No," I said hoarsely, stepping forward. My legs felt like lead, but rage and fear kept me moving. "You've done enough. Leave my family alone." The elf tilted its head, its polished eyes locking onto mine. "Enough? Oh, not at all. There's still so much to do, so many games to call. The night is young and the rules are clear. We'll play until dawn, or until none are here." "You monster," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. She stood, her eyes filled with a fiery mix of grief and fury. "You can't keep doing this. You can't." "I can," the elf interrupted cheerfully, clapping its wooden hands together. The sound clacked, like bone snapping. "And I will. The next game's here, and it's quite a treat. A guessing game. Oh, isn't that neat? I spy with my little eye. Something blue." Sarah flinched at the words, but she straightened, her voice trembling but steady. "No," she said, "no more games." The elf's grin didn't falter, but the ticking sound emanating from its body grew louder, more insistent. "Refuse to play and you'll face the cost. Tick-tock, your time will be lost." I reached out and grabbed Sarah's arm. "We don't have a choice," I murmured, my voice shaking. "We have to play. We'll get through this. Just focus." She glanced at me, her face pale and tear-streaked, then nodded. "Fine," she said, her voice breaking. "Fine. Something blue. The vase on the table. Is it the vase?" The elf clapped its hands again, swaying side to side like a delighted child. "Oh, no. Such a bad guess. Try again or face the mess." Sarah's breathing quickened as her eyes darted around the room. The curtains. Is it the curtains? The elf let out an empty laugh, its head twisting sharply to one side with a click, click, click. Wrong again. But don't despair. You've still got one more guess to spare. Amy whimpered from the corner, her small frame shaking as she clutched her knees to her chest. Mom, she whispered, please get it right. I'm trying, Sarah said, her voice cracking. I'm trying. She turned back to the elf, her hands clenched into fists. The picture frame on the mantel, it's blue. Is it the picture frame? The room fell deathly silent. The elf stood perfectly still, its ticking growing louder, each sound like a hammer striking metal. Then it slowly shook its head, its grin somehow widening. Oh, so close, but not quite true, it said, stepping toward her with deliberate, jerky movements. And now I'll take what's owed from you. Sarah stumbled back, her eyes wide with terror. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, please, please don't. The elf moved faster than anything in its mechanical body should have allowed. In a blur of wood and gears, it grabbed Sarah by the face, its wooden fingers clamping over her temples, its fingers over her eyelids. Stop! I shouted, rushing forward. But the elf turned its head toward me, its glassy eyes glinting. The weight in the air grew heavy, suffocating, pinning me in place. No matter how much I strained, I couldn't move. Sarah screamed, a piercing sound that cut through the room as the elf tightened its grip. Blood began to seep from the corners of her eyes, dripping down her cheeks like crimson tears. Please, Amy cried, her voice breaking. Leave her alone! The elf ignored her. With a sickening pop, it pulled its hands back, holding something wet and glistening in its grasp. Sarah's eyes. Sarah curled up on the floor, her hands clawing at her face as blood poured from the empty sockets. She let out a guttural wail, her body convulsing in agony. The elf held the eyes up to the light, inspecting them with a childlike fascination. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, it pressed them into its own face. The gears inside its head whirred and clicked, and when it blinked, the eyes moved, alive yet utterly wrong. Ah, such fine eyes, it said, its voice pleased. They suit me well, don't you agree? Amy ran to Sarah's side, sobbing as she tried to help her mother, who writhed on the floor, her screams echoing through the house. I could only stare, frozen in horror, as the elf turned its gaze toward me. Shall we play again? It asked. Its painted grin stretched wide, its new eyes glinting with a sickening humanity. Sarah lay on the floor, her empty sockets weeping blood, her body trembling in silent agony. Amy knelt beside her, shaking as she pressed a dish towel to her mother's face, desperate to help in any way she could. I stood over them, powerless to do anything but watch, anger and fear knotting in my chest. The elf returned by the fireplace. Such fun we've had, it said in its sing-song tone, tilting its head. But there's more to play, let's not delay. No more, I said, my voice raw. The elf twitched, its head jerking unnaturally as the ticking in its body grew louder. No more, it giggled, the sound sharp and grating. Oh no, my dear, we're far from done. The next game is a classic one. It clapped its wooden hands together, and out of nowhere, 4 chairs slid into the living room, their legs scraping the floor as if moved by invisible hands. They arranged themselves in a tight circle in the center of the room. Musical chairs, the elf exclaimed, spinning in place with a creak of its wooden joints. A game of luck, a game of speed, a game that takes all that I need. Amy's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face filled with fear. Dad, we can't do this, she whispered, her voice trembling. The elf's grin widened. Come now, take your place. The music starts and begins the race." I hesitated, my gaze shifting between Amy and Sarah, who lay too weak to move. Guilt twisted in my stomach, but I stood and pulled Amy to her feet. "Stay close to me," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not letting you lose." We took our places in two of the chairs, and the elf perched itself on a third, its movements stiff and unnatural. The fourth chair remained empty, a silent reminder of the stakes. "Let the game begin," the elf sang. From somewhere unseen, a warped melody began to play. A haunting, distorted version of a music box tune, the notes twisted and grated. The elf rose first, moving with jerky grace as it began circling the chairs. Amy and I followed, our steps slow and hesitant as we moved in time with the eerie music. The tune sped up, the tempo rising, and my heart raced to match. The elf spun and swayed, its glassy eyes locked on Amy with unsettling intensity. I tightened my grip on her hand, silently urging her to stay focused. Then the music stopped. Amy and I lunged for the chairs. I managed to push her into one just as I dropped into the seat beside her. The elf stood still, its head twisting toward the empty chair. "Ah," it said softly, "no loser appears." The empty chair groaned, its wooden frame folding in on itself until it vanished into nothingness. "Round two," the elf said, its voice gleeful. The music started again, faster this time. Amy and I were on our feet before the first note finished, circling the three remaining chairs. The elf moved ahead of us, its limbs twitching in rhythm with the warped melody. When the music stopped, I threw myself into a chair, dragging Amy with me. Relief fluttered my chest as we sat down just in time. The elf remained standing. It clapped its hands slowly, mockingly as the third chair dissolved. "Oh dear," it said, its tone dripping with false sympathy. "One less chair, the end draws near." Only two chairs remained. My heart pounded as the music started once more, its tempo now frantic and uneven. Amy clung to my arm as we circled, her breathing ragged and panicked. When the music stopped, I pushed her toward the remaining chair without hesitation. She landed in it hard, her wide eyes meeting mine. I turned towards the other chair, but the elf was already there. It stuck and approached me. Its wooden hands clamped down on mine, its grip like a vice. "You've lost. Oh, what a shame," it said, its voice filled with malicious delight. "But the rules are clear in this little game." Pain shot through my arms as its wooden fingers tightened around my wrists. I screamed, struggling against its impossible strength, but it was no use. With a sickening crack, it twisted my hands at the wrists and pulled. I howled in agony as the tendon snapped and blood poured from the torn flesh. The elf held my severed hands up, inspecting them like a prize. "These will do quite nicely," it said, pressing the hands to the ends of its own wooden arms. The gears inside its body whirred and clicked as the hands fused into place. It flexed its new fingers, the motion disturbingly smooth and human. I collapsed to my knees, cradling the stumps where my hands had been. Blood soaked the floor beneath me, and the world swam in and out of focus. Amy screamed, running to my side. "Dad! Oh my God, Dad!" I tried to speak, to comfort her, but the pain was overwhelming. The elf loomed over us, its grin as wide as ever. "Ah, such fine hands," it said, flexing its stolen fingers. "But the night isn't done. Oh no. There's still one more game to go." Blood dripped steadily from the stumps of my wrists, pooling on the floor beneath me. My vision blurred with pain and exhaustion, and the room swayed as if it were spinning. Amy was sobbing beside me, her small hands gripping my arm, trying to pull me upright. "Dad, please," she cried. "You have to stay awake, please." "I'm fine," I lied through clenched teeth, the searing agony making every word a struggle. I looked down at the ruined ends of my arms. Amy had quickly torn sections of my shirt off to wrap around the stumps. Crimson was already rapidly soaking through the makeshift gauze. Sarah lay slumped nearby, her body still trembling, her face a ruined mask of blood and hollow sockets. Her breathing was shallow, but at least she was alive, if barely. The elf stood across the room, flexing its new fingers, my hands now eerily human against its wooden frame. Its stolen eyes blinked at us with unsettling precision. The time is near, the end is nigh," it sang softly, almost to itself. "One last game before we say goodbye." I felt a surge of anger despite the pain. "Why?" I rasped, my voice raw. "Why are you doing this to us?" The elf turned its head sharply, its wooden neck creaking. "Why?" it repeated as if amused by the question. "Oh, my dear friend, it's all just play, games and laughter to brighten the day." "This isn't laughter," Amy snapped, her voice trembling but defiant. "You're hurting us." The elf crouched low, its face level with hers, its motherly eyes unblinking. "Hurt? Oh no, child, you don't understand. I only take what's fair, what's planned. The games are simple, the rules are clear. You've played so well, no need for fear." Amy flinched but didn't look away. "We didn't have a choice," she shouted. The elf straightened, its head tilting as if considering her words. "Choice? No, that's true," it said with a soft sigh. "But the fun would vanish if you could deny." The room fell silent save for the faint ticking that emanated from its chest. "Enough," I said, forcing myself to my knees. The room spun and Amy reached out to steady me. "Just finish this. Leave us alone." The elf clapped its hands loudly, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. "Very well," it said cheerfully. "The final game? Oh, what a delight. It's charades we'll play on this cold, dark night." A chair slid into the room once again, though this time they weren't for us. The elf took its place in it, sitting upright and eerily still. Now, it said, "pay attention, dear friends. The rules are simple, guess before the game ends." It stood, its movements jerky and unnatural as it began to mime. At first, its gestures were exaggerated, almost cartoonish. But as the game went on, they became more erratic, more violent. Eventually, the doll raised its hands to its throat, mimicking choking. Then it dropped to the floor, convulsing in a grotesque parody of death. Its eyes rolled back, its wooden body twisting unnaturally as it acted out its charade. Amy clutched at me, her nails digging into my arm. "What is it doing?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Guess," the elf hissed, its voice suddenly sharp, echoing with a metallic edge. "Guess or pay the price." "Someone choking," I said hoarsely, my mind racing. "Is it choking?" The elf froze, its head snapping toward me. For a moment I thought I'd guessed correctly. Then it laughed, the sound hollow and upsetting. "Wrong," it sang. It turned toward Amy, its stolen eyes narrowing. "The child has yet to try," it said, its tone almost gleeful. "A guess, young one, or you'll surely cry." Amy's lip quivered, her small frame trembling. I don't know," she stammered. "Try," it urged her, its voice insistent. "I don't know," she cried, tears streaming down her face. The elf's grin widened, its painted mouth stretching impossibly far. "Then the cost is mine to take," it said softly, stepping toward her. "No!" I shouted, lunging forward. but the pain in my arm sent me crashing to the floor. The doll loomed over Amy, its wooden hands gripping her jaw with surprising gentleness. She screamed, struggling, but its strength was unrelenting. "Such lovely teeth," it murmured. "They'll fit just right." Amy's cries turned to muffled shrieks as it forced her mouth open. With a sickening crunch, it began pulling her teeth free one by one. Blood poured from her mouth as the elf worked methodically, each tooth dropping into its wooden palm with a soft clink. I screamed for it to stop, dragging myself toward her, but it was over before I could reach them. "Perfect," it said, its voice now layered. "Simply perfect." When it was done, the elf stepped back, holding a handful of bloodied teeth. Amy collapsed to the floor, her hands covering her mouth as blood poured between her fingers. "Such lovely teeth," the elf said, pressing them into its own mouth. Its grin widened as the teeth fused into place, gleaming red and white. "Oh, how they shine, how they gleam!" Amy collapsed to the floor, sobbing and choking on blood, her hands covering her ruined mouth. I cradled her as best I could, my body trembling with rage and despair. The doll stepped back, admiring its reflection in a nearby mirror, its stolen teeth gleaming unnervingly bright. But Amy's muffled sobs were all I could hear, her face buried in my shoulder as blood dripped steadily from her broken mouth. Her small hands clutched my shirt, trembling violently, her body racked with silent, shuddering cries. I held her as tightly as I could with what was left of my arms, the pain in my stumps flaring with every slight movement. My head spun, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood and the suffocating presence of the elf as it stood over us, its motherly eyes gleaming, its new human teeth glinting in the dim light. "Oh, what fun, what joy to see!" it sang, spinning on its heels. "The games are done and now I'm free." I stared up at it, my vision blurred with pain and tears. "Why?" I croaked, my voice broken and raw. "Why us? Why our family?" The elf paused mid-spin, its head snapping toward me with a sharp click. Its painted smile twisted into something almost thoughtful. "Your door was near, your lights were bright, a perfect place to spend the night," it said with a mock bow. "No reason, no rhyme, no grudge, no plight, just luck, dear friends, on this cursed night." "You're a monster," I spat, though the words felt hollow. The elf laughed, a grating, hollow sound that echoed through the room. "A monster, a villain, call me what you will. Your tears and pain, they've been quite the thrill. But now, my friends, my time is done. I'll leave you here to grieve what's gone." It turned toward the door, its wooden limbs creaking as it moved. Sarah lay still on the floor, barely conscious, her breath shallow and labored. Amy clung to me, her silent sobs breaking what was left of my heart. "You can't just leave," I said, my voice shaking with fury and despair. "After everything you've done, you can't just walk away." The elf paused at the threshold, one wooden hand resting on the doorknob. It turned its head slowly, its glassy eyes locking onto mine. "Oh, but I can," it said softly, almost gently. "The night is mine, the games are played. I've no more debts and no more to trade. Farewell, dear friends, and do take care. I'll visit again, somewhere. With that, it opened the door and stepped out into the cold night. Snow swirled around its figure, but no footprints marked its path as it disappeared into the darkness. For a moment, the house was silent, except for the faint sound of Amy's muffled cries. Then the tension snapped, and I let out a shuddering breath, my body slumping forward. "They're gone," I whispered, though the words felt meaningless. Amy didn't respond, just buried her face deeper into my shoulder. "Sarah," I called hoarsely, forcing myself to crawl toward her. "Sarah, are you still with me?" She let out a weak groan, her head lolling to the side. Her face was pale, streaked with blood, and her hollow sockets wept dark red tears. "I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Can't see, can't feel." "It's over," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. "It's gone." Amy whimpered, and I turned to her, my chest tightening at the sight of her swollen, bloodied lips and her trembling frame. Her eyes were wide with terror, silently begging for comfort I didn't know how to give. "We'll get help," I said, though my voice shook with uncertainty. We'll get out of here." I forced myself to my feet, my legs unsteady beneath me. Blood dripped from the stumps of my wrists, leaving a trail as I staggered toward the front door. It hung open, snow blowing in across the threshold, the frigid air biting at my skin. The night was silent. No footsteps, no ticking, no sign of the creature that had destroyed our lives. "We have to move," I said, turning back to Amy. She stared at me, her face streaked with tears, and nodded weakly. "Sarah," I said, kneeling beside her and gently shaking her shoulder. "We need to get out of here. Can you stand?" She let out a faint whimper but didn't move. Her breathing was shallow, each exhale a rasping rattle. "Dad," Amy mouthed silently, tugging at my sleeve. She gestured toward the door, her fear evident even without words. I nodded, swallowing hard. "I'll carry her," I said, though the thought of lifting her with my injuries made me want to collapse. With Amy's help, I managed to get Sarah into my arms. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through my body, but I pushed forward, staggering toward the door. The snow was deep, the cold slicing through my thin clothes as we stepped outside. The quiet was oppressive, the world around us utterly still. No neighbors stirred, no lights flickered in nearby windows. It was as if the entire world had gone silent in the wake of the nightmare. We made it as far as the driveway before my legs gave out. I collapsed into the snow, Sarah slipping from my arms, and Amy knelt beside me, her face a mask of panic. "I can't," I gasped, my vision swimming. "I can't." Amy turned toward the road, her small frame shaking. She raised a trembling hand and waved desperately. Through the snowy drifts, I saw headlights. The last sound I heard before everything went quiet was Amy's soft, desperate cry. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. The doctors told me the neighbors found us in the snow, Sarah barely alive, Amy sobbing silently by my side. They didn't believe my story. How could they? Amy hasn't spoken since that night. Sarah will never see again. And me? I have no hands to hold them with, no way to comfort them. Even this story has to be dictated. But the worst part is what it left me with. Every knock sends me into a panic. Every shadow outside the window feels oppressive. All I have to say is this: don't open your door on Christmas night.